What's happening, Bills Mafia? Ryan Thomas here, back again for another episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. In case you were wondering, I'm counting down the days left that I have in this quarantine. I got 2 days left. I'll be able to join the world again in 2 more days. This is really starting to, get me feeling a little bit irritable. Trying to stay as busy as I can. Luckily, we're in the peak season for NFL draft discussion. So for me, this is awesome to hop on here and use this Vice, my podcast, as a way to kill this quarantine. I got 2 days left, less than 2 days left. As of midnight, April 23rd, I will be back in the real world. So thank you for staying here with me, sticking here with me during this quarantine. I've tried to post as much podcast content as I can. Yesterday, I had 2 shows back to back. One was the top 5 best draft picks in Buffalo Bills history, and the other was the top 5 worst draft picks in Buffalo Bills history. Both lists were tough to make. One list, I would say, was easier to make, and you'll find out which one when you listen to the show. So I greatly appreciate the love and support that you guys show me, Bills Mafia from Buffalo, whether you're from Western New York or Bills backers member down in Florida or California. I greatly appreciate you guys tuning in and staying on with me. Doing these live shows in the afternoon really puts it to a greater audience. So that's kind of the silver lining in this whole quarantine for me. It's allowed me to kind of see where people are tuning in, how people are tuning in, and making the show bigger and better. So fire away some comments in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube. Whether you're tuning in on Facebook or YouTube, you can follow along with all things from yours truly on my Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take, as well as Instagram. Very active on Instagram as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the Facebook page, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. The audio audience is growing each and every day. So thank you for that. Feel free to leave a review as well to any show that you see, whether it's just in the comment section or if you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts. Fill up those stars, leave me a review. Make it a positive one if you can. I would really appreciate it. Hopefully it is a positive one. And onward and upward. It makes the show better, and it allows you guys to tune into the show and to let me see who you are too. That way I can find out where you're from and all that stuff. I really enjoy that. So let's get to the subject matter here. The subject matter is Brandon Beane's approach to the 2021 NFL Draft. Yesterday, Buffalo Bills general manager Brandon Beane spoke to the media in regards to this upcoming NFL Draft. And each and every NFL Draft is important. This is how teams are not only rebuilt, but built up from pretenders to contenders, from contenders to Super Bowl champions. So I find the NFL Draft to be so fascinating. That's how we see teams get better. That's how teams get better long-term, is great drafting, patience at the draft board. I think we've seen each and every year from Brandon Beane since he took over as the general manager of the Buffalo Bills. And it goes back to the 2017 NFL draft class, which was technically Sean McDermott's first year inside the organization, and Brandon Beane wasn't really here yet. But that was a draft that you look at it and you say, wow, only 3 guys actually out of that class of 6 players are still on this team. But those 3 guys are starters. Those 3 guys are Pro Bowl caliber players. Trey White, first-round draft choice in 2017. Deion Dawkins, a second-round draft choice in 2017. And then obviously the recently re-signed Matt Milano, a fifth-round draft choice in 2017. So Bill Polian, former Buffalo Bills general manager, Hall of Fame general manager, he would always say that if you can enter into a draft with the intent of landing yourself 3 starters out of however many picks that you have, let's just say 3 starters out of 7 picks. Every team has 7 picks. Most teams do have 7 picks at least, unless they traded them or anything like that. But just for the argument's sake, Bill Polian would say 3 starters out of 7 is what you need in order to, get from point A to point B as a team. And I agree with him. I agree with him completely. I agree with him wholeheartedly, because when you go back and look at some of these Bills drafts in past years, they weren't even plucking 2 starters out of some of these drafts. They weren't even plucking 1 starter out of some of these drafts, where now you look at these drafts from Brandon Beane. I just talked about 2017. I didn't even get into 2018. I didn't even get into 2019. 2018 was a year that completely transformed this franchise into what it is today. They make a big move to go up into the top 10 and trade to get the 7th overall pick in the 2018 NFL draft. And they take the guy that is so far so good, filling the shoes that were empty, that Jim Kelly left empty for, 20 plus years? Josh Allen. Then you trade back into the first round and get a middle linebacker that one week Bills Mafia loves him. The next week, I won't say Bills Mafia hates him. I'll say Bills Mafia is really quick to throw criticism at Tremaine Edmunds. And we have to put it into perspective, as I always offer, the perspective that Tremaine Edmunds was drafted as a 19-year-old in this league, brought in at an extremely young age, and was brought into a defense that was patchwork, that Sean McDermott was rehabilitating in his first year as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. So Tremaine Edmunds had a ton of pressure on him to make things better quickly. And I think he's filled that role pretty well. All things considered, I think he's filled that role extremely well. So that's a solid pick to me. Now, the question that is on everyone's mind is this option discussion with Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmunds. And that's something that I think will only continue to be a point of discussion until that actually happens, until we actually know whether Josh Allen is going to be re-signed to a long-term deal, or whether Tremaine Edmunds is going to be re-signed to a long-term deal. I would obviously prefer both guys, both players, to be re-signed on long-term deals. This is a team that desperately needs their quarterbacks. And I say quarterbacks. Josh Allen's the quarterback of this team. No question about it. But Tremaine Edmunds is the quarterback of that defense. You need both of those guys long-term. And the fact that Brandon Beane has approached this draft with all things into consideration as far as long-term and as far as who is already on this team, I'm curious to see how that approach impacts his approach to the 2021 NFL draft. You have, on one hand, the discussion within the fan base as far as who the Bills should take 30th overall in the second round, in the third round, or whatever picks that they have. You have that discussion. That discussion goes on from the moment the Bills season ended against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's when that discussion starts, right? And it only continues leading up to, obviously, the NFL draft. But then you have the approach that the general manager is taking. And I'm going to take a guess here. Just a solid guess. This is all speculation. That's what podcasts are this time of year. Until we know the results of the draft, we can only speculate and only assume what Brandon Beane's approach actually will be. We can only assume it and speculate. So with that being said, I think that there are a few factors here that we have to look at. The discussion from the fan base is that they want someone to really electrify this team, whether it's offensively or defensively. I'd like to think at 30 they can get a difference maker. I don't know if this difference maker is as much of an immediate impact player as he would be in the top 10. It's just how the draft works. Typically, Trey White was 27th overall in the 2017 draft, and he ended up being a great pick for Buffalo. But when I look at 30 and this draft in particular, I want to find that guy. I want to find that player that fills a hole. And there are very few holes on this team, mind you. I will say that there are very few holes on this team, but I want a guy that can come in here and take a spot, fill a spot whether he's an immediate impact player or not, long term, the goal is at 30 to get a player long term that can provide value and that can provide a solid difference maker. And there's a few guys at that 30 pick range that I really like. And there's a few directions that I think Brandon Beane is going to go in terms of this NFL draft that could bring about a player that not only fills a role or quote unquote a hole, but can come in here and be an immediate impact, difference maker, as I said. So when I go to that thought process and I think of who's out there that can make a difference, well, okay, it's not so much as who, it's what positions on this team are positions that could obviously be filled. Now, I think that there are a lot of options on this team that could be filled. Are they necessarily, needs? Are they necessarily holes on this team? Not necessarily. But let's go to running back. Running back is a topic of discussion. Let's address the elephant in the room. I have said this on the show, on a lot of shows leading up to this draft. If Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott decide that running back is the position that they should attack, I trust their judgment, okay? But I don't think it's necessarily the number one priority position for this team. I think that this team has 2 running backs on it, 3 running backs, mind you, with the addition of Matt Breida, that can play adequately enough on a pass-first offense to do what we need to do via the run game or as an offense. I don't think Matt Breida is Barry Sanders. I don't think Zach Moss is Earl Campbell. And I don't think Devin Singletary is Walter Payton. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is, for the lack of a run game that the Bills showed last year, this is a passing offense. We're actually in a passing league. Now, there are exceptions, of course. There are running backs in this league that are the elite of the elite, the cream of the crop, that allow these teams to continue to have this run-first approach. The Minnesota Vikings with Dalvin Cook, Carolina Panthers with Christian McCaffrey, the New York Giants, obviously, with a healthy Saquon Barkley. Those teams are kind of going against the grain of what the NFL has turned into because of the fact that they have those elite running backs. Now, is there a Christian McCaffrey in this running back class? Is there a Saquon Barkley in this running back class? Is there a Dalvin Cook in this running back class? I don't think so. And I like Travis Etienne. In fact, I love Travis Etienne. In fact, I love Najee Harris. Those are the 2 guys that stand out from the collegiate level that are entering the NFL draft, those 2. But in terms of what could bring about a new aura to this team, I don't quite know if running back is what really does it for me. For me, I understand that it's a sexy pick to electrify this offense even more than it already is. I get that. But in terms of where I saw the problem within this team last year was the defense. The offense, for as bad as the run game was, for as lackadaisical, I guess you could say, as the run game was, I didn't feel like the run game, whether it being lackadaisical or not, I didn't really feel like the run game helped or hurt Buffalo. I feel like the defense wasn't quite up to snuff in comparison to 2019. And if I were to look at, impacting this roster and making this team better in order to go that extra step, I would look at attacking this defense. You have mock drafts out there that are all sorts of different ideas, filled with all sorts of different ideas. Mock drafts that have Buffalo taking a running back in the first round, mock drafts that have Buffalo going all defense. And I'm looking at every defensive position. Defensive end, Peyton Turner, Boogie Basham, Deo Odeyingbo, Rashad Weaver, Wyatt Hubert, those are defensive ends in this draft. Looking at defensive tackle with the age of Star Latuile and sitting out a year, and Harrison Phillips, great guy off the field last year. There were moments where he left things to be a little bit to be desired out there, but I think he is a big part of this defense and their plans. But a guy like Tyler Shelvin out of LSU, I really like. He's a big, solid defensive tackle that is a run stuffer that could really make a difference on this team. Those are the type of moves that I think Brandon Beane is looking at. I don't think this regime, and in particular this organization just as a whole, is looking to make that sexy move. I don't feel like that's been their approach outside of the Stephon Diggs trade. You have also Kwity Paye, you have Jason Owai, you have Jalen Phillips, you have Azeez Ojulari. You have pieces, edge players in this draft. Joe Tryon, Greg Rousseau of the U. I mean, Jalen Phillips and Greg Rousseau, those are two really solid players at defensive end in this draft that I really like, and they both came from the same school. Now, I'm looking at a position that I think should be targeted by this Bills regime, and this is a safe, solid target for the Buffalo Bills franchise. And this is a target that I think makes a ton of sense, a position to target that I think makes a ton of sense. You look at the Bills' linebacker core. As I alluded to with Tremaine Edmonds, a lot has been thrusted upon Tremaine Edmonds since he was drafted by the Buffalo Bills. And I'm not saying that Tremaine wasn't prepared for it. I'm not saying that Tremaine Edmonds can't fill that role. I think he can. But you got Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano, and that's it. I mean, I think that the other side with AJ Klein was not really filled in the most adequate of ways. You have Micah Parsons out of Penn State University, linebacker university. You got my guy Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah of Notre Dame. You have Zaven Collins. You have Jamin Davis. You have Nick Bolton, Baron Browning, Jabril Cox. I mean, there are some really good linebackers in this draft, and they're all from really solid programs. Penn State, Notre Dame, Tulsa, Kentucky, Missouri, Ohio State, LSU, Alabama, Ohio State, North Carolina. You got linebackers for days, I think, in this draft that could come in and not necessarily be an immediate impact guy in year one, but be somebody that can come in beyond year one within his rookie contract and make that contribution. It's really rare for a rookie linebacker to come in and make that massive impact right out of the gate. But I think it would drastically help this Buffalo Bills defense. And I think that is a portion of how Brandon Beane is attacking this draft. You look at, the last few years of these Bills drafts, the first round draft choices outside of Josh Allen have all been on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's a trend that's going to continue. Now, I said first, I guess you could say first draft choice in the draft outside of Josh Allen have all been defensive players. That goes back to Trey White. That goes back to, including Tremaine Edmonds as a first round draft choice, Ed Oliver, and then AJ Epinesa. Those are, White, Edmonds, Oliver, Epinesa. Those are all, really decent players, I think. Oliver and Epinesa have left a little bit to be desired. I think, the room to grow is there for both of those guys. But I think that Brandon Beane is going to approach this draft in a very patient way. I don't see the Bills moving up the draft board. I don't see the Bills moving up for anyone unless it's somebody that they didn't expect to be in the 20s that they would have taken had they been in the top 15 range to start off the draft. They're entering this draft with the 30th overall selection. If someone creeps out of that top 15, and they feel like that's a guy they would have taken in the top 15 if they had that pick, and it doesn't cost too much to go up and get that guy, it could be something that they do. But I just don't think there is too much of a gap in those defensive positions in this draft. This is a very deep defensive draft. I think the linebackers are solid. I think the corners are solid. I think the safeties are pretty good. Edge rusher is pretty decent. Not as good as other classes, but decent for a team that needs improvements or depth at those positions. If there's that one guy that they really like and they decide to make that move, I wouldn't be against it. But I think that it's something that we could see a very patient approach from Brandon Beane in this 2021 NFL draft that includes adding to the defense. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Take care, everybody. Stay safe and go Bills.